Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and today I'm doing a Play This, Not That with ISS Vanguard and Etherfields. This is going to be a comparison of the two games, what I like more about each one. Did I like either of them at all? I do have reviews on both already up, so you probably know the answer to that. But more importantly, before we go into this, before we cover anything else, it is important to understand that despite being a comparison, ISS Vanguard is still only a prototype, which means any comparison inherently is flawed to some degree, as things may change for better and for worse in the final game. So that aside, the reason I'm doing this video with a prototype is because I've had enough people ask me my opinion of ISS Vanguard. How does it compare to Tainted Grail? How does it compare to Etherfields? And unfortunately, I haven't played Tainted Grail yet, and I hadn't played Etherfields yet, so I pulled out my copy and proceeded to get 10 hours of gameplay in so that I can compare these two games. You see, I got roughly 8 or 9 hours of gameplay in of ISS Vanguard before our demo ran out, before the prototype journey expired, ended, whatever it is. And so from there, I figured I have to get roughly an even amount of time of Etherfields so that I can compare the two. And there is a lot to compare about these games. While very different in very many ways, they have a lot of commonalities, a lot of overlap, and a lot of reasons why you might want one or both of these games, or perhaps, just as easily, perhaps you want neither, and that might be helpful as well. And so to begin with, they are both Awakened Realms games, which is a terrible comparison. There's no reason to compare them. The manufacturer, the company making the games, has nothing to do with whether you should or shouldn't get these games. But they are both available to buy now. If you want to late pledge Etherfields, you can get your hands on a copy of that in their late pledge. I'll link down below. And if you want to back ISS Vanguard, that's available on their current GameFound. Right now, on GameFound, it is available for you to buy. And so you can get both of these games to acquire now, and then get them roughly a year from now as well. Unless, of course, you already have Etherfields, in which case this conversation is probably too late in that sense. Additionally, because so far we have terrible comparison reasons so far, but additionally and more importantly, these are both heavily narrative-driven games. If you are someone who is gameplay above everything, if you are someone who is looking for that next complex strategy game, then I don't think these games are for you. These games take gameplay and they weave it into rich narrative experiences that are ambitious, far more in the stories, far more in the narrative, far more in the sequencing and all the things they do differently rather than the gameplay. They both have gameplay. They both have gameplay that is enjoyable to go through, but they are much more narratively focused, much more narratively driven than your average game. Both of them, and this is a con on both of them barely need the gorgeous miniatures that you see. Now, they both can use them. To be very clear, I am happy that both Etherfields, the core box, and ISS Vanguard, the core box, have a set of miniatures, but in both games, I don't think you need the deluxe extra monster box full of whatever. I mean, they're going to have different for ISS Vanguard and for Etherfields. They both have different boxes to give you all the extra tons of creatures and miniatures and whatnot. But the actual time those characters, those miniatures will stay on the board compared to just using a standard token miniature for them is fairly minimal. They're nice to get. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm getting both of them. I've gotten the Etherfields ones. I will be getting the ISS Vanguard ones. And that's because I like the miniatures. But ultimately, if you're trying to save money, understand that as someone who loves miniatures in many of my board games and thinks that they genuinely add to the immersion of that game, I think what they add to these two games is primarily cost, shelf space, a little extra maintenance as you try to grab them from the box, and then yes, they also add a little bit extra immersion as well. But I don't know for you if they are worth that extra cost of all the other cons. Both of these games break up into phases that are completely different. They have a flow that's very different in each one and yet mirrors the other. For Etherfield, that's going to be the concept that you have the awakening phase followed by the slumber followed by the dream. You have this general dreamscape that you awaken in and have to travel around. That's continued by then having a few slumbers as you make your way to the dream sequence. And then following that, they have the core gameplay of the actual dreams that are different game to game. Every dream providing a richly different experience, and to me, for Etherfields, that is the heart of the gameplay. And then in ISS Vanguard, they have it a little different. They have the ship phase, which is going to be this giant ship book where you manage all the things going on for your crew, for your ship, for all of that. Followed shortly after by the landing phase, which is more akin to the slumbers. It's the transition from one state to another. You're going to move from your ship to the actual planet, and you'll have a short single lander phase as you go, followed by the planet phase where you will engage in the adventure of the story, where you will move around discovering and unlocking the narrative journey, making decisions that have consequences in them, making decisions that rely on knowing how and where to push yourself and how to get what you want out of this experience. And so that's mainly the main reasons to compare these games. Heavily narrative-driven games, both from the same company, both that have miniatures, don't need them, both coming out and available at the same time, both in the same price point, both having sequences and how they play out, of how they give you different aspects to break up the meat of the story so that you have different continuing experiences as you go. And so, which one do I prefer? Which one do I not? Do I like either? Do I like both? Again, I have reviews for both of them. I will link them down below in case you want to see those. But in short, let's go through what I like more about Etherfields first, and then we'll go to ISS Vanguard, and then from there, my final thoughts. And in Etherfields, the first thing I like more is the fact that every dream is uniquely different. Genuinely, every single time you dive into a dream, it is a new puzzle, a new way of managing what you have to do, a slight reconfiguration of, okay, great, well, I know I have the basic core structure. I'm going to have to go to various points, explore those, figure out what it needs to do. I'm going to have to utilize my hand of cards to actually get what I need. There's a little resource management that will come from your hand of cards. But then the puzzle being presented is slightly different every time. Are we rotating the cards? Are we trying to get from one place to another? Is this a little bit more sequential? Am I suddenly in the dark? Do I have to rely more on my equipment? Do I have to rely more on my hands? Would this have been better to go in with 2 Dreamwalkers? There are slight differences to every single dream. And I continuously look forward to every single new dream in Etherfields because I know that I'm getting something a little different than last time. It keeps that fresh for me. It has a significantly more enjoyable freshness to it that ISS Vanguard, and granted the limited 3 planetary explorations I had, didn't feel as uniquely different. While I enjoyed the narrative aspect of it, and we'll get to that more soon, the actual difference of each planet was not nearly as striking as they are in Etherfields, and that will be a major pro in the Etherfields camp so far. Additionally, in Etherfields, I significantly prefer the hand management and deck building than I do to the dice rolling of ISS Vanguard. Now, to be clear, I covered this in my review of Etherfields. I don't think the deck building is that rewarding in Etherfields. It's one of the cons that I have for this game. I love deck building as a mechanic, and I wish it delivered more. But even though I wish it had been better, I still prefer hand management over rolling dice. Now, I don't mind the rolling dice in ISS Vanguard. It delivers and does what it needs to do, and it has a pro in the accessibility it gives you to the story. Awakened Realms put out a whole game, whatever, designer diary on the game and why they're utilizing dice in terms of how it makes the game more accessible and keeps the story more together and doesn't break it up as much. And I think it's true. I think it works because I like the story in ISS Vanguard so much more. And it feels like I'm unlocking that story so much more and so much quicker. In Etherfields, I don't care about the story at all. There is a story going on here. Again, keep in mind, roughly 10 hours in, I don't know how this will play out. There's some hint of slumbering, of something happened to you. You ended up in this dream world, and you're slowly unlocking and uncovering some sort of background to who you are. And I just don't care. It's not that I won't care. I may well find it intriguing and masterful and everything else, but right now, what keeps me coming back to Etherfields dream after dream is trying to figure out each individual dream on its own merits. There's an overarching thing going on here that is nice, and I certainly don't mind it, but it's not what's pulling me in. Versus ISS Vanguard is exactly the opposite. ISS Vanguard, it is exactly the story that is pulling me in. It is exactly the choice and decision and consequences of my actions, and I do feel like there are consequences to my actions. ISS Vanguard gets a huge point in the sense that when I play Etherfields and when I explore something, it just kind of feels like the game is happening to me. It doesn't feel like I'm really having that much of a choice in the sequential narrative that goes out in this game. I kind of feel like I have to push on different points. And granted, what I do and don't push on will present a different experience, and yet I don't feel as in control of my actions and the consequences as I do in ISS Vanguard. In ISS Vanguard, when you have that story happen to you, when something happens to you on a planet, when you have to figure out which pathway to go down, when you have to figure out when to push yourself a little further, when to withdraw, every time something impactful happened to me in this game, even if I didn't know it was coming, I still felt more attached to that event. I still felt more attached to some degree of responsibility for what happened, how it happened, and how I'm going to have to recover from that. I am so much more drawn into the story of ISS Vanguard and the consequences attached to every decision and action I make, and that is going to be a huge plus in ISS Vanguard's camp. And then additionally, if ISS Vanguard, I find ISS Vanguard to be significantly easier to get into. Now, to be very clear, I did have to struggle and bite my teeth along the way getting into this game initially, and most of that's going to be prototype issues, or I should rephrase, most of that I hope is going to be prototype issues. Small inconsistencies here and there in terms of how things are going to go. But all that said, I did get this game up and running even with the prototype rulebook in not that much time. I had the initial tutorial done, easy, jumped into it, not a problem. I had a lot of follow-up questions with the designers with Awakened Realms in terms of how different things interacted with each other. But the actual game itself, I was able to set up and get running from a rulebook that had no pictures, no nothing, no anything. It's, like I said already, it's a prototype. Versus Etherfields, I had to indeed download that 4-page guide that everyone's talking about because the actual rulebook itself is so convoluted in terms of trying to teach you a game that doesn't yet exist on your table, which is hard and complicated. And so Etherfields, while I would say I haven't had any ongoing problems with Etherfields, the actual ability to get in and understand the game that is happening was much harder. Worth it, yes, but so much harder. ISS Vanguard, I can get you up and running in 20 minutes, and I mean that because I've done it. When I played with Jesse and Quacklup, we had our how to play video, 20 minutes of teaching him the landing phase of the planetary exploration phase, 20 minutes of teaching him, and he was ready to go up and running. Sure, I had to know more in the background, but it was easy to jump in and it was accessible, and that is a huge point for ISS Vanguard. And then this for me is going to be the biggest one, and this is the part where I tell you that if I had to pick one of these two games right now, it would be ISS Vanguard, and it's not even close. And the reason for that, for me, is going to be this last point of the ship phase versus slumbers. Both of these games break up the core gameplay. Both of these games break up the gameplay into different chunks that are meant to be rewarding and different in different ways. And I think it's meant to be both. It's meant to both be rewarding in its own way, as well as being different. Having a different sequence ongoing, instead of going through the same thing again and again, it pulls people into the game. You don't want players to be doing the exact same thing time and time again. They will get sick of it. You want to break up those experiences. This is something you see in good board game design and good video game design. Having different things broken up makes it continue to be fresh as it progresses. The problem for me in Etherfields is I despise the whole dreamscape slumber phase of the game. And it's not actually that bad. It's only that bad because of how repetitive it is in nature. They certainly do things to try to mix it up, to try to make it a little fresher over time. But the ratio of new to repetitiveness is so bad that I have taken to basically skipping it except for when I want to do it. Occasionally I jump back into it just because I want to kind of go through it. I want to try to slightly touch upon the experience that is meant to be happening here. But for the most part, I rapidly simulate whatever was supposed to happen, grab a few cards, take a little damage, and then jump into the next dream phase. And I realized that roughly 7 to 8 hours into Etherfields that I realized that's what I was doing. And I did that even after watching Shut Up and Sit Down's review and thinking, no, I won't do that. And then I did the exact same thing. And the difference for me is that once I did that, I'm still drastically is probably the wrong word, I'm still very much enjoying the dream sequences in Etherfields. ISS Vanguard, on the other hand, is almost the exact opposite. You know this book, this ship phase that everyone's terrified of? You know the ship phase that everyone looks at like homework? ISS Vanguard, the office supplies board game? I hear it. I genuinely do. I pulled out this ship book for the first time and genuinely thought that I was going to have to be fairly negative about this game. But what's amazing to me, and what I've heard from other people who have played this game as well, is I actually find the ship phase far more rewarding than the planetary phase. Now, I like both, to be very clear, and specifically I like both because the ship phase alone, well, first of all, it couldn't exist on its own. You couldn't really skip one or the other the way you could in Etherfields. But more than that, in ISS Vanguard, the planetary phase allows me to explore the planet. It gives me gameplay that I don't find as rewarding as I would like. I want to be very clear with that. I am fine with the gameplay, but I am certainly not writing any testaments to how amazingly rewarding it is. But the exploration on the planet, the consequences, the decisions, all of that happens in the planetary exploration phase, and I wouldn't want to give that up. It's what I have to do to get at that story, and if I just want a good story, I'll read a book. I want the gameplay combined with the story. But then when that's done, I actually get to do the better part of this game. I get to go back to my ship phase and I get to slowly but surely upgrade things. I get to turn around and upgrade my generators. I get to deal with the situation on the board and allocate my resources accordingly. It is certainly a degree of management in this book, but it's management that is gameplay related. Both the gameplay and the ship phase both the planetary phase and the ship phase in ISS Vanguard, I find rewarding and am eager to jump into. Versus in Etherfields, I find myself skipping a good third of the game because I just don't like what it does. And for me, above anything else I said in the pro and con camp, That is why ISS Vanguard is the game I would recommend over Etherfields. And I think they're both good, to be clear. Like I said already, Etherfields is better in terms of the uniqueness of each stream. ISS Vanguard has me more immersed and caring about the actual story. But the actual aspect of not skipping a section of the game can't be overlooked. And so from the two of these games, I would pick ISS Vanguard as my pick. As far as my final thoughts, I mean, that really is my final thoughts to a degree. But I want to be clear here. I'm roughly, like I said already, roughly 8-9 hours into this, roughly 9-10 hours into this one. I have played both of these a decent chunk, but I have no idea where I'll be 10 hours further. You see, I talked a lot about the story in ISS Vanguard, but maybe that's just the prototype. Maybe the prototype has a richly rewarding narrative experience, and when I start to play the actual game, I just won't find it as immersive. That is possible as well. Or maybe it's just an issue of where I am in the story. 10 hours more in either of these games can drastically change my opinion. At the same time, I'm not going to be able to complete both these games to give you a play this, not that, and so I specifically wanted to cut this off at roughly 10 hours before doing this comparison video. And so where the future is, I have no idea. Will I like them both in 10 hours? I have no idea. Subscribe to my channel. You will, as always, see the games leaving my collection, when they leave, why they leave, how I felt about them, and where they ended up. I would say that I'm a fairly difficult to please player. There are so many games that I find richly rewarding initially, and then as time goes on, something new pulls me in. The games that last are significantly harder to find than the games that I initially like. Is it possible I will finish neither of these campaigns? Of course it is. Do I know how the future plays out? I don't really know. Do I think I'll finish them? As of now, I think I do. I think I will. And so we'll see over time how that plays out. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know in the comments down below if you have any other questions that I can answer. Anything about either one of these games that you want to know, I am happy to address them in any way I possibly can. At the end of the day, I think these are both amazing games. If you have liked Tainted Grail, if you have liked Seventh Continent, if you have liked narrative-driven games, I think these are both excellent games you should be adding to your collection. If you haven't liked any of those games, or more specifically, if you have played them and haven't liked them, I don't know if these will change your minds. I don't know what they could possibly do different to make you change what it is you like or not like in their game. ISS Vanguard is ambitious in the story it is telling. There's no question about that. But Etherfields is equally ambitious in the different way it tells stories and the crafting of those dreams. Both of them, like I said already, are games I would highly recommend adding to your collection. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I hope you enjoyed this video. And as always, have a good one.